Montauk and the grid. What you have read in the last chapter, or rather what has been presented to you, has been considered privileged information for centuries. Yet it was always available to anyone who asked the right questions. It is all common sense when you think about it. Although Montauk and its history has been a major mystery to the general populace, its position as a gateway situated on the morphogenetic grid has been no secret to the various mystery schools. This explains not only the journey of Thomas Jefferson to retrieve the language of the Montauks, but the locale's fascination to the Germans and its use during the Montauk Project. Montauk is, of course, not the only such gateway, but is receiving considerable attention because of what has occurred there. The negative activities and programming that occurred during the Montauk Project have been aptly described as crimes against humanity. They could also be described as crimes against the grid. If we are going to heal the rift that has occurred at Montauk, we are going to have to start by unveiling the mysteries surrounding it. This has begun in part with the books that have been written up to this point, but it also includes the curriculum of the mystery schools that orchestrated the endeavor in the first place. We cannot blame the United States government, whose officials are only on the surface of any possible conspiracies. We cannot expect to cover the entire agenda and learning systems of the various mystery schools on Earth. That is a gargantuan task. But we can begin to cover some of the pertinent and basic points. The information on the function of the morphogenetic grid was the beginning. Next, we will examine how the structure of the morphogenetic grid takes place through the evolution of the Platonic solids. Named after Plato, who studied them, the Platonic solids are the 5 basic shapes of solid geometry: the tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, isosahedron, and the dodecahedron. The evolutionary process of these geometric shapes has long been guarded information and is very basic to understanding universal evolution. It was touched upon in the last chapter and will be examined a little more in depth right now in order that you understand the most basic concept of evolution. In order that you understand the first concept of a grid, consider the simple example of a ship's navigator. When an ocean-going vessel is at sea, the navigator has to keep a consistent eye on the bearings. The bearings refer to the position of a ship with regard to other fixed points such as rocks, mountains, or buoys. The navigator uses a compass balanced by a gyroscope in order to determine his position in space. If there are no rocks or other points of dead reckoning, he also uses a sextant and various celestial bodies that can be found in the heavens. The whole idea is for him to reference himself with regards to space. The lines of latitude and longitude he employs from maps are an invaluable tool, although they are an arbitrary system. A navigator is simply trying to find out where his ship is located in terms of space and time. When we consider the morphogenetic grid of the Earth, we are still dealing with the idea of referential system, but are also taking on the idea of consciousness. Each and every living organism has to reference itself in space and time in order to survive. The whole idea of honoring one's father and mother is basically acknowledging where one came from. It is a reference point in the stream of time and space. Of course, there are many other such reference points. The 5 Platonic solids. Below and clockwise from upper right are the cube, the octahedron, the isosahedron, and tetrahedron. These shapes are all referential to each other in that any of them can be arrived at by utilizing the tetrahedron as the basic shape. If we want to survive, it becomes vital to reference ourselves as dutifully as is humanly possible. This includes the comprehension of the entire universe and our own position with regard to it. Native American shamans understand this in a rudimentary sense at the very least. They teach that there are 6 directions: north, south, east, west, above, and below. These directions form the basis of a 3-dimensional grid. If one then extends outward along any one of the 6 directions, it stands to reason that he or she will eventually stop somewhere along the grid, and an arbitrary point will be fixed at that position. If one then scribes a sphere that is equidistant from the center to that fixed point, all directions will be accounted for. This is the first act of consciousness, and it is sometimes represented as the orb of creation, or the egg. Kabbalists would refer to it as a sephiroth, which means sphere. The second act of consciousness would be to duplicate the sphere just created. This creates a shape known as the Vitica Pisces, which is illustrated below. The Vitica Pisces is the football-shaped object in the center, which is formed as a result of 2 spheres intersecting. It has also been represented as a fish. It literally means fish bladder or fish vessel, and has been used as a symbol for Christ. The Vitica Pisces is said to contain all the wisdom in the universe, in part because all of its creation can be derived from it. If you were to view the Vitica Pisces from the side, point A, you will get another view which looks like a UFO, assuming the spheres are transparent and you are looking at a 3-dimensional representation. The third act of creation would be a 3rd sphere, and the resultant glyph would be as follows. With very little imagination, in 2 dimensions, one can see that an equilateral triangle can be formed by connecting various intersystems. If you add another sphere and juxtapose them so that all are closely packed around a common center, a tetrahedron is created. The tetrahedron is very special because through means of duplicating itself, it can in turn manifest into a cube. Octahedron, isosahedron, and dodecahedron. This is what is known as the unfolding of the Platonic Solids. There you go. From that 3 circles. Shall we continue? Let's. The Platonic Solas are defined as a series of exactly 5 shapes mathematically possible in 3-dimensional geometry, whose lines are of equal length and whose angles are of equal degree, thus creating plane surfaces of exactly the same shape and size. These 5 shapes are the same ones mentioned in the previous paragraph. Every shape in creation, biological or otherwise, can be reduced to the pattern of one of these 5 Platonic solids. Although the Platonic solids are named after Plato, he learned much of this information from the Pythagorean mystery school. Pythagoras taught all aspects of geometry, with particular reference to how it relates to consciousness. The 5 Platonic solids are vital to understanding the grid and all of human creation. Buckminster Fuller has even received an academic acclaim by demonstrating that all of creation consists of tetrahedron shapes in one form or another. Fuller even patented his work on the grid, and the Russians procured it for their own use. Unfortunately, Fuller's work is not written in such a fashion as to be easily understandable to the common man, and has gone unnoticed by most people. But his work is said to contain all the secrets of the universe. Some people may be familiar with his patented Geodesic Dome, which is the most visible edifice at Disney's Epcot Center in Florida. It is composed entirely of tetrahedrons. The entire process of creation and evolution can be viewed as an unfoldment of geometry, but also an unfoldment of consciousness, because it was consciousness that made the first movement in space. As a reflection of self occurs in consciousness, one tries to reference oneself in space and time, and the 6 cardinal directions become apparent. All of this is a simple overview of what is a very deep subject. One can get an even better understanding by creating the various Platonic solids with styrofoam balls and sticks and seeing how they unfold. Stan Tenon's tapes will help immeasurably in this regard. If one wants to take it a step further, one can study the work of Buckminster Fuller, which is available in most libraries. Despite all the logic offered for a grid, one can still ask another question. How did it all happen in the first place? Or was it a Big Bang? As is stated in many different philosophies and religions, before the beginning there was a void. In that void existed the potential for all things. Once the first act of consciousness was performed, that was it. Every conceivable geometric connection that could be made was made, and the entire projection of creation occurred. We are somewhere along in the process of that right now. It was along these geometric principles that the energy grid of Earth was formed. A matrix of lines defined by shape, the energy grid of our planet is determined by the unfoldment of the Platonic Solas. As these solids, lines of energy, intersect and interact with one another, various mechanics occur. For example, when two lines of energy intersect at a cross point, a node is created. Nodes are standing waves that result in upwellings and inwellings of energy. An inwelling might result in a canyon, a deep hole, or even a whirlpool like Charybdis, an actual whirling vortex of water near Italy that sucked in many sailors in Greek mythology. Upwellings might take the form of volcanoes, mountain ranges, or geysers. Inwellings and upwellings often appear together and are created by the mutual reinforcement of each other. For example, you might find huge caves within a big mountain. Menan Toll in Cornwall, England is an example of an inwelling energy as it contains a hole, but there's also a perfectly shaped phallic rock immediately astride it, which is an upwelling. Montauk has always been described as a mountain, yet it contains a bottomless lake and a huge conical spire off the coast that once wrecked the hull of a ship called the Great Eastern in 1862. There are also huge caverns underground. These precise locations of upwellings and inwellings have been mapped and zoned for the creation of artificial structures. They include the many pyramid complexes, the great stone circles such as Stonehenge, or the enhancement of natural structures, thus creating what is known as sacred sites or sacred ground. It is no accident that many of these same locales are often chosen for burial mounds. The reason is that bones contain the crystalline structure of the entity who used them, and this establishes a link to the being's life information that has been stored with the energy grid. This permits communication with the dead and gives reason to protect the site, also allowing superstitious fear to keep such places hallowed. Montauk itself is full of the old bones of the Indians, particularly around the Montauk Manor. I have heard stories of workers ceasing to work on a condominium complex in the area because of hauntings. It was abandoned and never completed. Of course, the Montauk locals have aggravated the situation with the Indian spirits to no end. Decades ago, they had the audacity to build the Montauk Community Church with stones that were taken from the sacred Indian burial grounds. The church still stands today, stones and all. If you are brave, you can even attend its services on every Sunday. Just hope that it doesn't cave in. At a cross point such as Montauk, energy can be trapped or used to inject or transfuse into the circulatory system of the planet. A person such as Duncan Cameron became a vital link to such an end. With extensive psychic training and esoteric technology, he would tap into the heartbeat of Mother Earth. He would become conversant with the various energies along the grid and could extract or feed information into it, depending on how he was being directed. Thoughts could be programmed to the masses, or even the entire consciousness of time could be influenced. Duncan was not chosen to do this work by accident. We have already witnessed remarkable synchronicity with the name Cameron. As will be told a little later in this book, I discovered that his person and his physical vehicle are tied to the grid in a manner that is nothing short of breathtaking. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the most recent installment of the Pyramids in Montauk. And I want to invite you to enjoy the refreshments in the refreshment stand. And this brief intermission will conclude within the time as set forth by the Montauk grid, which time is meaningless in space-time and the fifth dimension. So stay tuned. Namaste, namaskaram.